was mostly influenced by people that my parents were close to. So my father's best friend was a dentist, so for a while I wanted to be a dentist. And they both were very involved in their church, so for a while I wanted to be a minister. But eventually, when I went through college, I started to realize that I wanted to be able to help people therapeutically, although I didn't have the language for that. So after college, I went to work for a methadone maintenance program, and I was in their intake and evaluation department. So I had access to a lot of the charts of people who were coming through the program. And every day, this was way back in the mid-70s, in the days of punch cards. So I had a box full of punch cards with the data on it for each person going through the program. And there was, for the time I was there, for whatever reason, no one whose last name started with the letter A. So every morning I would get there, I would see a man's name, Alan Baca. And that was the only name I saw because it was a box full of cards. And about halfway through my time there, I realized that almost all these people, as I went through their charts, asked constantly, what's the common denominator? Had a string of broken relationships, busted marriages, broken families, split up families. So I began to think in terms of the importance of marriage and family and relational connection. And then I got a call one afternoon from one of the clinical directors who said, you can take Alan Baca's card out of the box. I said, well, was he done? What happened? And he said, well, no, last night he blew his brains out. That had a profound effect on me. And I realized in the days that followed that I wanted to really pursue this as a profession. My specialty is marriage and couples therapy. So I do work with individuals, but that is what I really know. I've been married for 40 years, and so marriage is something that I feel is in my bones. I discovered pretty early on that it was really not a good use of time or dollar to advertise in the Yellow Pages because people didn't really select therapists that way. So I started to develop relationships with communities where couples and families would tend to congregate. So whether that was community-based groups, churches, synagogues, often people would go to their clergy person in order to talk about their marital difficulties. So I established some relationships with folks like that, somewhat with physicians who have, access to and often hear about family and marital troubles, as well as just other therapists. And over the years, those networks developed, those relationships developed, not unlike the one with you. And so that became and still really remains the best source of referral that I've discovered. That's a tough question because so much of what we do in a very private way. And as you know, as therapists, we don't always get feedback from our clients. I've had the experience over the years of feeling like that my work with an individual or with a couple was a real treatment failure, only to discover months or years later when they would call me to tell me that it was so helpful, and recalling things that were said that I had long ago forgotten, if they wanted to come back in to do more work. And other occasions when I felt like, oh, the treatment was really quite successful, only to find that the couple say I discovered divorced 2 years later or whatever the case may be, which doesn't necessarily mean the treatment was a failure, but you just don't sometimes get a sense of how people are receiving or what people take away from the therapeutic relationship. So I define it more in terms of whether or not, if I'm working with a couple or with a family, whether there's a sense in which people are getting to know each other better, and first of all, getting to know themselves better, and then getting to know each other better where they find themselves developing and improving and increasing their feelings of closeness and attachment to each other. That's one thing I look for. And sometimes, couples may come in and they're really wanting to separate, but they don't know how to do that. And so sometimes success is defined as whether or not people are able to move on into their lives in a way that leaves them intact. Well, as I said earlier, I think that developing relationships with other professionals, other providers, was kind of a key to the development of my practice. And also I had opportunities to give talks from time to time on different topics that related to marriage and family. So when those opportunities would present themselves, I would snatch them up. I never refused those opportunities, even though public speaking is not my favorite thing to do. But I found them to be a very useful way to, again, sort of get my face out there and allow people to get to know me. But really, I think the thing that I would underscore most would be the willingness to develop personal relationships with people, because folks tend to refer folks to someone who they know personally, not someone who they've just randomly picked out of a book somewhere. Well, I think developing friendships out of the collegiate contacts, the professional contacts, I would say has been most rewarding. And I think there's a real sense of reward too when a client who you've been able to really help through a difficult time, and maybe they came through whatever their relational struggle, then goes on and becomes a kind of advocate for you and refers people. Some people are very comfortable with that and other people not so much. So from time to time there will be that client that will refer people, and I find that both rewarding and having been a very effective way to grow a psychotherapy practice. Not well, no. I'm kidding. I have done various things. I've tried to surround myself with people, not necessarily therapists, but people who I am friendly with and close to, and where I can just be the Tim who's not a therapist. I also was very fortunate in, kind of going back to an earlier question, to create, or not, I didn't personally create it, but to have created a very tight-knit group of therapy friends in the South Bay, where we would meet regularly every week for kind of a brown bag lunch discussion about clients that developed into really deep personal friendships that remain to this day. And that was a great way to kind of, little like a MASH unit, a great way to offload steam. And then I took up golf, which gets us all in the end. So I have a weekly golf round with my golf buddies that I don't miss as a way of getting out there, and that's a great way both to express friendship and kind of offloading steam. It's also a great way to get out anger. I've struggled with that. I mean, the obvious thing is that I try and refer when I can to other colleagues I know. So in a way, I'm giving back, at least to the level of helping other people in their professional lives. But I continue to seek ways to do that. There is an organization that is in East LA that has contacted me not too long ago to see if I would be willing to provide some counseling pro bono for folks that just simply can't afford it. And so I'm looking into that as a way of giving back. I think, first of all, to recognize that developing a practice takes time. So to have realistic expectations about that. It's probably going to take, as in most startup businesses, at least 2 years to sort of get yourself out there and begin to get a clientele together. So if you have a day job, I wouldn't just quit it. I'd keep that going and gradually build the practice. One way to do that is to sublet from somebody who, say, has an office so that you're not accruing all of this extra expense and can begin to, gradually build your practice. I would encourage people to continue to read because the field is ever changing and it goes through phases and kind of fads that are important that sometimes mirror the culture and what's going on in the culture. So I encourage people to keep themselves current. And as I said earlier, to be kind of out there, letting themselves stretch a little bit into activities that may not always be comfortable, but where they're getting themselves known by the professional community around them or by other therapists. Maybe they're doing speaking engagements or like with Grow Your Practice, maybe they're coming to events where they're meeting other people and having conversations with them. Well, I think that for me, it's about listening as well as I possibly can, with empathy. I use a form of therapy for couples that I work with primarily called EFT, Emotionally Focused Therapy for Couples. Susan Johnson's work has been really instrumental in everything I've read and have learned through the years. I sort of have a bit of an eclectic approach, but her work and the work that flows out of that, which has to do with the importance of our attachments and how we make them and how we break them, is kind of key to what I do and how I think of myself as a therapist.
That's it.